Why did the Germans not encircle Stalingrad? This question was asked by an Oberst und Subscribestar. He notes, the Wehrmacht in the first couple of years of the war was all about massive encirclements and Bewegungskrieg. I can't seem to find anywhere a reason why it was decided to attack Stalingrad directly and not cut it off like other cities, Kiev, Leningrad or the cauldrons during Barbarossa. The OKW and Hitler must have been aware about large cities being so difficult to take directly by force. I had an educated guess on the reasons why Stalingrad was not encircled, yet to be sure I asked Jens Wehner, since he curated the Stalingrad exhibition of the MH in Dresden a while ago. He noted that the answer is not as straightforward as I had thought, and one needs to take into account the various developments from the planning of Case Blue to the actual execution. But before we do this, we also need to look at a certain misconception about German encirclements. For this we look at Adrian Wettstein's work on the Wehrmacht in urban operations. He notes, for 1939 to 1942, the following can be stated. Operationally, almost all of the case studies in other cities mentioned were attacked head-on or flanking. The German side surprisingly rarely resorted to complete encirclement. For the most part, it was geographical and related logistical problems that prevented them from doing so. Wettstein notes that Warsaw was encircled, but only after a frontal attack. Mogilev was also encircled, but at that point the battle was almost over. So as you can see, although the Wehrmacht is famous for encirclements in field battles, when it comes to cities this was clearly not the case. As so often, the devil lies in the details. And speaking of important details, Chris from Military Aviation History and I currently have an Indiegogo campaign running for the translation of key documents about the famous German dive bomber, the Junkers 87 Stuka. Be aware that there are only a few days or even hours left if you watch this video later. This is not a mere translation, we added a lot of additional information to these documents in the footnotes to provide the proper context as well. Already more than 1,000 people have helped fund the project, allowing us to add a lot of additional documents into the book. If you want to learn more, check out this video or click in the link in the pinned comment. Yet back to Stalingrad or the developments that led to the Battle of Stalingrad. First we look at the Weisung 41, Directive 41 from 5th April 1942. Under the general intent it is noted, adhering to the original guidelines of the Eastern Campaign, it is important to hold the center of the front. In the north to bring down Leningrad and establish land connection with the Finns, but on the southern wing of the army front to force the breakthrough into the Caucasus area. It is noted that this can only be achieved in succession and that at first the forces should be combined in the south to destroy the enemy in the westward of the Don, then take the oil fields in the Caucasus region and finally to take the pass across the Caucasus. Stalingrad is not mentioned in this paragraph. Under the section Main Operation on the Eastern Front, Stalingrad is mentioned first, namely in Phase 3. So a short outline on the previous phases. Phase 1 was about taking Voronezh. The second phase started around Kharkov to attack along the Donets River and the second attack eastward with the goal to eliminate the Soviet forces. The third attack phase of these operations is to be conducted in such a way that formations pushing down the Don will unite in the area around Stalingrad with those forces advancing eastward from the Taganrog-Artanovsk area between the lower reaches of the Don and Voroshilovgrad across the Donets. These ultimately establish the connection with the Panzer Army advancing towards Stalingrad. So at this point Stalingrad is basically just a meeting point, yet the next paragraph has some further information. If in the course of these operations, especially through the seizure of intact bridges, prospects should present themselves for forming bridgeheads eastward or south of the Don, such opportunities must be seized. In any case, an attempt must be made to reach Stalingrad itself, or at least to bring it under the effect of our heavy weapons in such a way as to eliminate it as another center of armament and transportation. So in other words, the objective was not to take Stalingrad, just to reach it, or at least be able to put it out of action by artillery. Now one might argue that this directive was made by the Wehrmacht's operations department and Hitler had a different opinion. Yet Directive 41 already was heavily changed by Hitler according to the semi-official history of Germany and the Second World War. The document known as Directive 41 was the version heavily corrected by Hitler himself and reworked especially in parts concerning the main operation, of a draft submitted to him the day before by the Wehrmacht operations staff. Also, there are mentions of ideally capturing bridges, but not across the Volga, so in short, taking Stalingrad or crossing the Volga was not part of the initial plan, or as Maudsley put it, the German march on Stalingrad was originally a secondary operation, intended to cover the conquest of the Caucasus. Hitler's grand strategic emphasis was on the capture of economic resources, and his main preoccupation in the late summer of 1942 campaign in the south was not Stalingrad, but the North Caucasus and the OA centers of Maikop and Grozny. So let us move on to the execution of Case Blue to see what changed. The first phase of Case Blue was very successful in one way, but in another less so. Measured against the specification of the overall operational planning, the territorial objectives had been achieved unexpectedly quickly by then, but the actual purpose of the first operational phase, the destruction of the enemy forces standing between Oskol and Don, had not been achieved in any way. Yet there were different opinions. Some assumed the Soviets were conducting planned withdrawals, while others assumed the Soviets were broken, namely Hitler. Glantz notes about the situation in mid-July 1942. By mid-July, Timoshenkov's new Stalingrad front was in tatters. Its forward armies, 21st, 28th and 38th, withdrawn or withdrawing across the Don River, with only a fraction of their original strength. Confirming Bock's judgment, Stalingrad front's forward defenses were ripe for preemption and subject to defeat in detail on the approaches of Stalingrad, but only if an adequate armored force was available to do so. Meanwhile, in Directive 44 from 21st July 1942, it is noted that the unexpectedly rapid and favorable operations against Timoshenkov's armies justify the hope that in a short time it will be possible to cut off Soviet Russia from the connection with the Caucasus. German military intelligence service of the Eastern Front, Fremde Heere Ost, also noted in mid-July that the Soviets were determined to defend Stalingrad. The chief of the army's general staff, Halder, was concerned about taking Stalingrad. Hitler less so. Yet on the 17th of July, Hitler noted that even if an attack on Stalingrad fails, it would be enough if shipping traffic from the Caspian Sea was cut off. Apparently then, and this is important in view of the events to come, Hitler was not at this point necessarily interested in taking the city itself. In short, from Stalingrad not being an objective, it changed to an optional objective, although not a mandatory, at least by 17th July. Yet in Weisen 45, Directive 45 from 23rd July 1942, it is now mentioned to take Stalingrad, and this has been already ordered. To the Army Group B falls, as already ordered, the task, in addition to building up the Don defenses, in the advance against Stalingrad, of smashing the enemy group being built up there, occupying the city itself and blocking the land bridge between the Don and the Volga, as well as the stream itself. The issue is Directive 45 was based on optimistic and wrong assumptions. As such, it was assumed Stalingrad could be easily taken, which of course would make an encirclement unnecessary, since that would take extra time. This brings us to the final point and likely the most important one, geography, namely the Volga River. The Volga is a huge river. According to Wikipedia, it is Europe's largest river in terms of volumetric flow of water. So crossing it was not easy, far from it. To encircle Stalingrad, the Volga had to be crossed at least once, yet if you really want to encircle it properly, 2 times is required unless you use basically one pincer. Additionally, Stalingrad stretched out along the Volga. It was a long city, which also complicates encircling it as well. In other words, one does not just cross the Volga, and since Stalingrad was basically a spontaneous target of opportunity, it is doubtful that enough engineering equipment was available or special forces ready to take important bridges. Especially considering that the Germans sent special forces to take an important bridge somewhere else already. Several teams of Brandenburgers, the elite special operations troops of the German army, tried to seize the Don River bridges south of Rostov, on the road to Bataisk. After surprising the Soviet bridge guards on the night of 25th to 26th July, the Brandenburgers had to hold the bridges for 24 hours before the 1st Panthers arrived to secure the objective. Such operations are generally planned long beforehand and need special preparation. To summarize, the Germans did not encircle Stalingrad since its location along the largest European river, the Volga, made it very difficult. Even if there was a possibility to dig bridges across the Volga that were close enough to allow for an encirclement of Stalingrad, this would have required special operations, a very different approach and/or a lot of luck. Similarly, if bridging equipment could be used instead, this would also require a lot of material and troops, which needed to be prepared as well. Yet looking at Directive 41, Stalingrad was not an objective, and only in the second half of July Stalingrad turned into an objective of opportunity, and even then at first it was an optional objective. Thank you here, Austin, for your question and support. Thank you to Jens Wehner for helping me out with this question. Special thanks to Andrew for reviewing the script. If you like what you see, consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar. As always, sources are listed in the description. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for watching and see you next time.